Well, it's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to see those of you who have been able to get into the space. There's clearly an issue with some technology today, but we thank God that God is not dependent upon technology. God is always in the space with us, whether our technology is working or is not working. So we're grateful for that, and so pleased to have an opportunity. It's good to see you, Pastor Peter. Great to have an opportunity as well, just to work again with APF. It's been some time since we've seen each other physically.
Yes.
So it's good to be able to interact and engage. Thank you, Jeff, for getting the space set up. And thank you, Dave, if you do drop in or when you're listening to the recording, thank you as well. I had a few thoughts about what might be the best way and the best thing to share with you in this particular season. And, I don't know what it's been like for you as leaders with the lockdowns, the curfew, the demands of pastoral care rising, perhaps financial and material pressures on you and your own families. And as well, the need for greater creativity. Here we are trying to connect across the world using technologies, some which are new, relatively new, and for some of us, we've been using for some time. But there being this great need for innovation and leadership. And at the same time, we have the same old challenges that never quite go away, even in the midst of a global pandemic. So there's no doubt that we're having to learn to lead well in extremely tough circumstances. And, the reality is that we're living through one of the most extraordinary and stressful ministry environments many of us will ever know in our lifetime. And, conversations amongst church leaders these days, at least here in the UK, and with people that I'm communicating with in other parts of the world as well, inevitably lead to things like, how tired people are feeling. The current conditions can create record levels of fatigue, but can also create record levels of anxiety and insecurity as well in ministry. So, we're seeing people, not seeing them, lockdown, curfews, etc. So in many ways, it's no surprise that for many church leaders at some point or another in this season, the thought of quitting has seemed a great deal more appealing than the thought of pressing on. So that's why I chose to do a session on why you shouldn't quit.
Oh no, this is when you're in this session.
May feel like it. Why you shouldn't quit, even though you may feel like it. So a story for you. There's a story that is told about a man who was walking along the roadside somewhere in rural West Africa, but it could have been in East Africa. It could even have been in Uganda or in Kenya or Rwanda. He's carrying a very heavy load on his head. He's on his way home from market, and after many miles of walking, he grows very weary. He begins to slow down because he's so tired. His pace slows, he's dragging his feet. And finally, one of the many pickup trucks that's passing by pulls alongside him, and the driver inside offers him a lift to his destination. I don't know the last time that has happened to you. Well, here in the UK, we would say he was on his last legs. That's the phrase we use. He was on his last legs, and he happily climbed in. He accepted the lift. He climbed in. He settled down for the journey ahead. And after a few miles along the road together, the driver could contain herself no longer. And she finally asked the man, aren't you going to remove that load from your head? And the man replies to her, "Oh, this load. You were so kind to offer me a lift, so I didn't want to bother you with my burden as well." That's what he says to her. So in Matthew chapter 11, from verse 28 to 30, Jesus says these words. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you," he says, "and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And sometimes we are like the weary man in the story, carrying a heavy load on our heads, who come to Jesus in response to his offer, bringing our weariness, but somehow, and sometimes we still neglect to remove the load from our heads. We neglect to give him all of the burdens that we are carrying. So most of the leaders I meet from one day to another care very deeply about what they do. They are passionate in their desire to inspire and to move people. Some of them want to see the world change because they were here and made a contribution. We want what we do to change people's lives. We've been hearing from some of you already about the missions you're involved in. We want what we do to change their possibilities. We want what we do to change their future. And whether people believe in God or don't believe in God, we want to remind them that God believes in them, that they are human beings who are created in the image of God and who are loved by God. But ministry pressures can be like a load on our heads. And if we don't learn how to put them down, or even how to replenish both body and soul, we can be in danger of giving up. Now, there are many ways to quit. And every now and again, I meet leaders who are worn out and who no longer seem to care. They haven't necessarily quit and left the building. They haven't necessarily quit and left their ministry, but they've quit in their hearts and minds. Their hearts are no longer in the work, in the ministry, and they are kind of just bouncing along, just coasting along. They're playing a part, but they're no longer fully present to the calling that is on their life. And they can become hardened in ministry. They can become brittle. The energy and the joy can go out of them in ministry. Now, some of you, I know the nature of your role and call. Some of you, I don't know that. Some of you are meeting for the first time in this space. I don't know the size or shape of your ministry, but I can tell you this, that after many years of working with leaders, I suspect that even in the midst of your gratefulness for all Jesus is already doing in and through your life, you may not always recognize or fully lay down the burdens you are picking up along the way, or carrying through your ministry journey. And those burdens can leave any one of us wondering and doubting the call on our lives, doubting ourselves, and doubting even our conviction to keep on keeping on. So in this brief time together, I want to give you 5 great reasons why you shouldn't quit, even if you feel like it. At some time or other, I have shared these reasons with leaders that I meet from day to day. Sometimes I've even shared these reasons with myself. So the first reason is this: the desire to quit at some point in your leadership journey, the desire to give up, is quite normal. Okay, so that's the first reason. The desire to quit, the desire to give up at some point in your leadership journey is quite normal. I've been working with leaders for over 35 years, and I can assure you that the desire to quit at some point in your leadership journey is quite normal. You know, when I started ministry, I started out in youth ministry. And then I moved through various ministry circles, and eventually I became a senior church leader, and then I became a senior leader within the national church. And I can tell you this, that in my first 10 years of ministry, I thought about resigning once every week for some reason or other. In the following 10 years, I averaged once a month, I thought about resigning. And in the following 10 years, it became less of an issue. But every now and again, when I was faced with a big challenge or a difficult season, I entertained the idea of resigning. Now, if you've never experienced the kind of discouragement and disappointment that can leave you wondering whether it's time to pack it, to give up on everything, especially in the times we're living through right now, you've either been in leadership for a very short period of time, or you've already gone to heaven, in which case, let's have a conversation, because I've always wanted a first-hand account. Romans 8:19-21 says this. It says, the creation waits in eager expectation for the revelation of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not by its own will, but because of the one who subjected it, in the hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. Now, there's a lot I could say about this passage that I've just read from the book of Romans, but I want to say one thing. I want us to focus on one thing from verse 20 and 21. It says, for the creation was subjected to futility, not by its own will, but because of the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. So the frustration that it talks about in this passage in Romans 8, verse 20, the frustration that the creation is subjected to is similar to our modern idea of disappointment. And the idea, it carries with it this sense of unfulfilled desires. Creation is unfulfilled expectations. And it means that disappointment and discouragement are frequently characterized by feelings of emptiness and grief, the kind of emptiness and grief that comes with knowing that although we did our best, somehow we ended up with something that wasn't great, something that was not the best. And it may come as a surprise to you to know that even God knows that feeling of frustration or disappointment. When it comes to his own people, we see it in the Song of the Vineyard in Isaiah 5, verse 4, where God says, what more could have been done for my vineyard than I have done for it? When I looked for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? And if you've ever felt disappointed and discouraged in ministry, you are in good company. In this broken world and in troubled times, even God's excellent work, our excellent work, can yield bad grapes. Discouragement can take hold when the person we hoped would come through doesn't. When the project we hoped would break through doesn't. When the opportunities we hoped would materialize don't. When the issue we hoped had been resolved isn't. When things turn out differently to the way we hoped they would turn out, that's the time that sometimes we begin to feel as if, why am I doing this? And the desire to quit can become overwhelming in those times. It's no wonder that Proverbs 13, verse 12 says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. I don't know if you've ever felt sick inside as you're seeking to serve. But it also says this, it says, the longing fulfilled is a tree of life. So disappointment comes to us for all kinds of reasons. It can come to us as well when we feel that we're under friendly fire, when we feel that we're unfairly or unjustly treated in a moment, when we're attacked by people who should know better, other Christians in our own church or in the wider church. You know, my first very powerful taste of disappointment came early in my ministry when I was facing friendly fire, because I was a woman called to ministry, and also because I was a Black person in a very white ministry world. People would often say things to me that they wouldn't normally say to other people. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, is this how believers behave? And I remember feeling very disappointed. And I often wondered if what I was seeking to do was worth doing. So I want you to understand what I'm saying here. I wasn't disappointed in God. I was disappointed in people, often in his people. I don't know if you remember the story of Moses coming down a mountain with 2 stones that had been hand carved by God. And Moses saw the golden calf the people had been dancing around and bowing down to, and they were calling this the God who had brought them out of Egypt. You see that in Exodus 32, verse 8. And Moses was so angered, so frustrated by what he saw the people doing, that he smashed both of the tablets he had been carrying. And the danger with such disappointment and frustration with people, particularly believers, particularly Christians, those in our own circle, those in the wider Christian world, is it can lead us to destroy what God has entrusted to us. Do not destroy the stone tablets God has given to you because of what other people are doing or not doing. Now, when your gifts include the gift of leadership, you will tend to be more resilient. You'll tend to be stronger when it comes to this discouragement than others, because leadership is committed to the task of solving problems. But the more effective your leadership, the more you'll find people bringing their problems to you, the more you'll notice the needs for transformation in your world, in your community, in your church, in your family, even in your own life. You will attract problems if you're a good leader. But sometimes the world's problems, the anxiety of church problems, the pain of conflict in relationships, the wounds of ingratitude, and other honorable wounds we experience in the heat of battle can feel overwhelming. It's also a sign that people matter and that ministry matters, that we feel this discouragement and disappointment. But what it means is that we can collect disappointment and discouragement along the route of ministry. And when we've collected too many, you remember the man with the burden on his head, with the weight on his head. When we collect too many and don't keep laying them down, resolving them, then we can find ourselves discouraged, disappointed. We can find ourselves paralyzed, immobilized, and we can find ourselves overwhelmed in our ministry. And it's not that leaders who give way to that of being overwhelmed don't love God. That's not the issue. It's not that they're not committed to ministry. It's just that they are weighed down by all the stuff. They are still carrying the burdens that come with ministry and leadership. I don't know if you sometimes feel weighed down by the stuff of ministry and leadership. Do you sometimes feel as though you're being carried in ministry, but you haven't taken the load off your own head? Now, the longer you're in leadership, the more likely you are to face discouragement and disappointment. And these discouragements and disappointments can be totally overwhelming, and they can be destructive to ministry. But you know, the amazing thing is, you know, there are some leaders who do leave, who they quit. Too many quit. But the reality is that in spite of doing an incredibly difficult job at an incredibly difficult time, most of us don't actually leave. We don't even leave in our hearts. We take these words from 2 Thessalonians 3:13 to heart. It says, but as for you, brothers and sisters, do not grow weary in doing good. And most of us, like me and you, don't follow through. We don't quit. But that doesn't mean that from time to time we won't feel like quitting. Why do you think there are so many scriptures about perseverance? And even Jesus wondered if the cup could pass from him when he was in Gethsemane. You remember that? So the first reason I want to give you why you shouldn't quit is the desire to quit at some point in your leadership journey is quite normal. The desire is normal. But don't quit. Don't quit, even if you feel that. The second reason you shouldn't quit, even though you feel like it, is because your thoughts and your feelings don't have the last word. You do. You know, sometimes we can forget that our thoughts and feelings are our thoughts and feelings. We own them. They don't own us. At least they shouldn't. And when the desire to quit calls, it comes around, it knocks on your door, and it tries to move in to your house, and it tries to move in during a curfew or during a lockdown. That's when we need to exercise some ownership over our feelings. The problem isn't whether you have the feelings, the problem is whether the feelings have you. And in spite of the way things are, we don't have to allow thoughts of fear, disappointment, inadequacy, insecurity. We don't have to allow them to come and set up camp in our homes, or set up camp in our minds, or set up camp in our hearts or in our emotions. Ephesians 4 says, be angry and do not sin. So what is it saying there? It says, go ahead, have an emotion, be angry, but don't sin. And don't let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. We're called to manage our feelings before our feelings manage us. You know, in ancient Jewish wisdom, it says that rather than acting in line with your feelings will eventually line up with the way you choose to act. In other words, the way you act, the way you choose to act can change your feelings. And the Apostle Paul points out that the battle zone for most of our spiritual battles lie in the thought life. That's why he writes back to 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5, where he says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. Now, for me, I don't know what will help you, but for me, I find it helpful to think of a stronghold as a house made of thoughts, or as a pattern of thinking that has a strong hold on my mind. And the truth is, the longer you entertain a pattern of thinking that has a strong hold on your mind, the more likely it is to move in and settle down with you in your mind. So it's the same as if you open the door to your house made of thoughts, and you let the pattern of thinking come in through the door and sit by your fire. Suddenly it's inside and it's harder for you to deal with. Some of your thoughts, some of those patterns of thinking need to be taken captive at the point of a spear and asked to leave the premises, asked to leave the house, asked to leave your mind. You remember King David. King David was somebody, he was no stranger to disappointment or to discouragement. And it's King David who laments in the book of Psalms. He laments not once, but 4 times. We see it in Psalms 42, verse 5, verse 6, verse 11, and in Psalm 43, verse 5. He says this, he says, "Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why so disturbed within me?" And he's talking to himself. So what do we see here? How does David deal with these thoughts, these patterns of thinking that have knocked on the door of his house of thoughts and wants to come in? Look at what he does. The first thing he does is he acknowledges that he's having the thoughts. The second thing he does is he explores the nature of the thoughts. The third thing he does is he expresses how he's feeling. And finally, he addresses how he's feeling. In other words, he took the time to notice that he was feeling sad. Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why so disturbed? Now, if you are one of these people, or you are the kind of leader who believes that Christians should bottle up their feelings, should press down their feelings and pretend that everything is well when it isn't, you will struggle to take internal territory for God. In fact, you may be like the man in our story, riding around with a load on your head. When we try to keep things hidden, they decay. They begin to put out a bad smell, and they have a way of expressing themselves in even more destructive ways. And for some people, you can see it in the way they treat church members. They become harsh, or they become over-controlling, or they're always angry. And we may give way to temptations that wouldn't normally interest us, or begin to justify things that are inappropriate. We begin to call evil good and good evil. We can ride around trying to ignore the load on our heads rather than simply saying, I have got a load on my head, being honest. By the way, if you just ignore the load on your head, even if you live like that as a leader, do not think that other people haven't noticed the load on your head. The people we serve don't always understand what they're seeing or feeling, but they will know when things aren't right. Do what David did. Get them off your head. Get them out of your heart. Don't create a space for them to warm themselves by the fire and to continue to torment you so that the voice you hear is the one that's telling you to quit. Tell God how you feel. That's what David did. And if the desire to quit is out of control, even if you're still functioning, tell someone you trust how you feel as well. You know, sometimes we get beyond the point of being able to help ourselves and we need the intervention of others. So take whatever help you can get. Don't be too proud to take help. That's how leaders who feel like quitting end up quitting. Why quit when someone else can help you to take those thoughts captive and lead them off your property? I say to leaders many times, I say, let your moment of darkness be the darkness of the womb, not the darkness of the tomb. Let your moment of darkness result in new life for you and new life for your ministry. Don't let it result in a certain end and the death of your ministry, even if you're still present. So the first thing is this: it's quite normal to have a desire to quit at some point in your leadership journey. The second thing is your thoughts and feelings don't have the last word, you do. The third reason you shouldn't quit, even if you feel like it, is because you are being cheered on by a great cloud of witnesses who belong to the past, they belong to the present, and they belong to the future. Believe it or not, you aren't the first to have felt like you want to give up, and you won't be the last. I could do a roll call of scripture. John, the Apostle John, Moses, David, Jacob, Hannah. Think of the years of disappointment that Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Hannah, Elizabeth, as they waited and hoped and prayed for children. Maybe they wanted to give up. Think of Job, who lost everything, struggled to keep hold of his dignity in the face of his very unhelpful friends. You remember his friends, his comforters? Or Joseph, betrayed by his own brothers, falsely accused by his employer, then forgotten by those he helped in prison. And what about Elijah? You know, Elijah expected the fiery display of God's power on Mount Carmel, and he expected that it would bring revival. Instead, it put a price on his head, and he had to run away. Elijah was so disappointed that he actually asked God to let him die. That's how disappointed he felt. I don't know how challenging or how difficult things may have been for some of you, or for some of the people you serve, some of the leaders you are seeking to lead, but I do know that you are not alone. I know that they are not alone. Others have gone before us. Others are standing with us, and others are dependent upon us. We are being carried on the shoulders of a great cloud of Christian witnesses who struggled before us and who are cheering us on now. You read about them in your books, in your Bibles. They're people you admire. They're people who broke barriers. They created wonderful opportunities for others to come to know Jesus. They are people who teach us through their own example what perseverance looks like, no matter what the cost. Hebrews 12 verse 1 puts it like this: therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so easily, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set out before us. There are those people who have come before us, but there are also those who stand beside us, like our persecuted brothers and sisters and Christians who live in war zones. I was asked recently by a leader, Kate, how do you maintain your focus and commitment through the tough times? And I said to them, I'm blessed. I get to interact with Christians from all over the world, and they give me the gift of perspective. They remind me that it's possible to continue to love God, to trust God, to live for God, to pray faithfully, even if bullets are flying, and even if environmental disaster is close, and even if persecution is part of my experience. They remind me. And sometimes we need to pray for the gift of perspective. Things may be difficult, but the likelihood is there are those in the world today for whom things are even more challenging than they are for us. And they are still loving and serving Jesus, and they stand alongside us, and alongside those who have gone before us. But there are also those who will come after us, those who don't even know that they're depending upon us. And this leads me to the fourth reason why you shouldn't quit, even though you feel like it. And it's this: it's because your face is already in someone else's future. There are some assignments that simply have your name on them. They require your face. There's a story in Acts chapter 9 from verse 10 about a man called Ananias. And just after Saul's conversion, and before Saul is commissioned by God for his service, we get a front row seat, a first-person view of the moment. Ananias says to God, almost he says this, he says, God, I'd rather not get involved with this man called Saul. So I'm going to read some of the passage from Acts chapter 9. It says this: in Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision, Ananias. Yes, Lord, he answered. The Lord told him, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. Lord, Ananias answered, I've heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priest to arrest all who call on your name. But the Lord said to Ananias, go, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. So by the time God arrives at Ananias's home, he's already shown Saul, who is blind at this time, he's already shown Saul the future. In verse 12, we see in a vision, Saul has seen a man. This is what God says. He's seen a man named Ananias. He's seen him come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. The problem was that Ananias had no idea before that very moment that he was destined to become a critical part of Saul's future. And when he did find out, he started searching for reasons to quit the assignment. But God said, Ananias, I'm not going to argue with you about this. I've already shown Saul your face, so it better be your face he sees when he opens his eyes. So most of us have no idea that our face, our gifts, our wisdom, our ministry is already in someone else's future. By the time we're ready to quit, we're not sure there's much we can accomplish. We often feel like failures. It's as though God vacated and left us to do the work on our own. But this brief passage that we read here in this book is a reminder that there are potentially world-changing assignments with your name on them and my name on them. And God has already gone ahead to prepare them without asking your permission or my permission. This means we have jobs we know nothing about today, but we'll get there if we persevere. If we persevere through our doubts, our fears, our feelings of failure sometimes. And when Ananias, like Ananias, even when we feel like we don't even want to do it. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting that we are indispensable. Remember what Mordecai said to Esther? If you remain silent, relief and deliverance will arise from another place. God can use someone else, but the fact remains that no one else will do what you have been called to do in the way you have been called to do it. God has a plan for your life, so why not go along with it? So the first reason I gave was the desire to quit at some point in your leadership journey is quite normal. Secondly, your thoughts and feelings don't have the last word. You have the last word. Thirdly, you're being cheered on by a great cloud of witnesses from the past, the present, and the future. The fourth reason I gave is your face is already in someone else's future. And the last reason I want to give why you shouldn't quit, even if you feel like it, is because faithfulness is God's true measure of success. Some of you may have heard me tell this story before. And it's a story of President John F. Kennedy's visit to a NASA space station in 1962. The president had noticed a cleaner carrying a broom. He greeted the man, he introduced himself to the man as if the man didn't know who he was, and asked the man, "What are you up to?" This is what the man said to him. "Well, Mr. President," the cleaner answered, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." So, what are you up to? You know, as Christian leaders, there's a great temptation to measure ministry success in the same way the world measures success. It is a mistake to do this because it leaves us valuing what we know and what we have and who we have. We focus on the scale or the scope or the size or the numbers or the popularity or the wealth that we have or don't have. And as important as those things might be, if we have learned nothing from these past few months with COVID, we should have at least figured out one thing, Learning about stuff, growing stuff, being able to do stuff and having stuff does not necessarily lead to transformation or to being transformational. It's not that these things aren't important altogether. It's just that there are some things that are even more important. And for us as Christian leaders, God's definition of success is measured by faithfulness, diligence, and obedience. So resist the temptation to ask, why aren't I accomplishing what she or he is accomplishing? Focus on what you've been called to do where you are. Ask the Lord, what have I been called to do in this place at this time? And what do I have in my hands to do it? Whatever part he calls you to play, even if all you're holding is a broom in your hands for brushing away the rubbish, do it as if the whole of God's mission depended upon it. This is what enables us to congratulate the efforts of others rather than criticize the efforts of others. This is what enables us to promote them rather than tear them down. I always say to leaders, I say this to myself, your critiques, the way you criticize others, is it motivated by a desire to build them up or to tear them down? Are you doing only what you're called to do, or are you trying to copy what someone else has been called to do? You know, the Bible tells us, imitate, Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. But it's one thing to imitate and reproduce someone's faith. It's another thing to try to imitate and reproduce somebody else's gift and calling. You're not made to accomplish another person's task. If you're part of an organization, your organization is not made to accomplish what another organization is doing. If you're part of a church, your church is not called to accomplish what another church is doing. You were made to accomplish only what you were called to do in the way that you were called to accomplish it. So be at peace with yourself before you find yourself at war with others, and ready to quit before you reach the finish line. Size is not the measure of success. Faithfulness, diligence, and obedience is the measure of success. Christianity has always been about transformation, not just information or multiplication or education. Moses led 2 million people through the wilderness, and Jesus led 12 disciples, maybe 120 committed followers on the outside. If you want, we could stretch it to 5,000. But 2 million to 5,000, even if we said that was where it landed for Jesus, which one, Jesus or Moses, was the most successful leader? Ministry is sometimes about size, but it is always about faithfulness. So I hope you now have 5 great reasons why you shouldn't quit, even though you might feel like it. I hope you embrace them. I hope you cherish them. I hope you practice them. First is the desire to quit at some point in your leadership journey is entirely normal. The second is your thoughts and feelings do not have the last word. You have the last word. The third reason is you are being cheered on by a great cloud of witnesses from your past, from the present, and from the future. And the fourth is your face is already in someone else's future. And the last reason you shouldn't quit, even though you feel like it, is faithfulness, diligence, and obedience is God's measure of success. And with that, I say, Selah. The Lord bless you and keep you and strengthen you. Those who are with me online, those who join the recording, the Lord also grant and release grace and energy and wisdom and strength to you wherever you are, whatever you're called to do, whatever the scale, size, scope of your ministry. May God bless you. And everybody said, Amen.